Welcome to Modern Steel Construction's monthly Field Notes podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. Our guest this month is Nyckey Heath, project manager with Bosworth Erectors, which is an AISC member. Welcome, Nyckey.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
How's life down there right now?
It's a little crazy in Texas. It's been kind of difficult because the construction world doesn't stop on the back end. So, we still have to do billing and we still got to make sure everybody gets the paycheck that, from the week before. So it was a little bit rough. I think at one point we brought in a welding machine and attached it to the server so we could get checks printed. So,
oh my gosh.
And I think probably 90% of our employees were without power, but it seems like everyone's back up and running now. We're pretty much fully staffed back on the job site. So what I did see a lot of, and I love this about Texas, is community. And lots of small businesses and churches opened their doors for warming shelters. Anyone that had power was posting on our neighborhood app saying, if you need a hot meal, please contact me. I've made, 8 pans of spaghetti, things like that. And so that is great about Texas.
Did you grow up there?
I did not. I was actually born in Houston, but when I was an infant, my mother moved us to Arkansas, which is where my family originated. I actually grew up all over Arkansas. I was in foster care since I was 4 years old, and I was luckily adopted by an amazing dad when I was almost 16, so about 15 and a half. Okay. And that was Northwest Arkansas. And that's kind of where I call my roots.
What was your first answer to the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Did it have anything to do with construction?
No, I wanted to be a famous country music singer. I thought I could sing, but now that I hear myself sing, I think I'm tone deaf. So that's definitely never going to happen. Okay. And of course, my dad told me I sang great, but I think you're supposed to tell that to your child.
And so I understand that you served in the U.S. Army. Can you talk a little bit about that? What made you decide to take that path and what your role was?
So growing up in foster care and in poverty, my family, what little bit of family I did know and spend time with, I realized if I didn't do something different with my life, I was going to end up in that place. And there was just this defining moment where I looked around me and I said, I can't do this anymore. I've got to make a change. I remember it to the day, 2:30 in the afternoon on October 31st, 1999. So I looked at my sister and I just said, take me to the Air Force recruiting office. And she said, right now? And I said, yes. And so we drove all over town and we couldn't find the Air Force recruiting office. There was a strip mall that had Army, Navy, Marines, and I walked past the Navy guy, and I said, don't really like those uniforms, and I kept walking. I saw the Army guy with his feet up on his desk, and then I kept walking, and I walked into the Marines, and the guy stood up at attention and basically said, can I help you, ma'am? And I said, no, sir. I turned around and walked out, and I went back over to the Army guy, and he said, hey, how are you doing? And I said, this is the right place for me. I did join the Army. It was great. I guess really I just saw it as a way to change my entire path. And I needed some way to pay for college or get some sort of technical degree or something like that.
How long were you in active duty or on active duty?
I was on active duty for 4 years. I got my EMT and then I went on to radiology school. I got trained in like CAT scan, MRI. And then when I got out of the military, I was going to go pre-med. And I learned very quickly that was not for me. I actually passed out when I see a lot of blood. It was very sobering. I actually passed out 3 times before I realized that I just needed to make a change. I luckily had a very good friend who was a friend of my dad's, and he worked in the construction industry, and he said, hey, have you thought about maybe getting a job in construction? And I said, I haven't, but I quit my job doing radiology and I went to work for an outfit in Northwest Arkansas as their secretary. Okay. And I started out answering the phones, and I very quickly couldn't handle just answering the phones. And I started asking the engineers if I could help with stuff. And then I started helping with takeoffs and estimates. And next thing you know, one of the engineers, like a year later, says, "Have you thought about being an engineer?" And I said, "No. What do you do?" So I started looking for schools that were really friendly to veterans and that I could afford, with the GI Bill. At that time, the GI Bill was just a certain amount of money per month. And
Sure.
And you could, use it however. So I had to really look at cost of living and all kinds of things. And since I had been released from the military at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, I was considered a resident in Oklahoma if I wanted to be.
Okay.
And I hadn't been gone long enough to be not considered one, so I could get in-state tuition. So I went to Oklahoma State University in Okmulgee. They have trimesters, so that was my fastest path to getting a bachelor's.
So you got a bachelor's in civil or structural engineering?
So I have a bachelor's of technology in civil engineering, and then I went to Norwich University and I got my master's in civil with the structural path.
So from there, can you talk a little bit about your career? I mean, or maybe a little bit before Bosworth, or is that where you've been the whole time?
No, actually, I worked in an engineering firm in Tulsa. I was going to OSU. I landed in Tulsa for an internship and they hired me. I worked for them for several years doing design work on multiple different types of projects, small structures, large structures. We did cell phone towers. We kind of landed on mostly just doing cell phone towers for a while because that was such a big industry. And then the sister company to that company does the fabrication and erection out of Muskogee. So I basically swapped positions with one of their engineers. I would see the photos and I would say, "Oh, I wish I could go look at that." And I knew there was so much more to learn. I wanted to know how things were built. And so I just kind of jumped in. And the first thing I designed, the guy came in from the fab shop and said, "Have you ever even seen a 1-inch bolt?" And I was like, "No, sir." He said, "Come with me." So he took me out to the fab shop. And after being in the fab shop, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm way over designing all this stuff. And I mean, it's just, we're looking at, a piece of paper, a book, software. We don't, a lot of times, theoretically in our mind, or for me personally, how I was taught in school, I just try to figure out what works. I don't really think about how it's going to get there. And so that was a long time ago, many years ago. I've been doing this overall about 16 years. So I went from there and I took a position for a steel erector and fabricator in Tulsa. I needed to get closer to Tulsa with space, for family and things like that. And so I'd made that change. Plus the company I was working for, we traveled all over the world, and I just didn't, with having a family, it wasn't right for me to be in Australia for 6 months at a time. I could do that when I was young and single, but I needed to get kind of grounded. So I took that position. I worked for them for several years. I actually ended up getting breast cancer.
Oh, goodness.
And it was really tough. So I've been cancer-free now for 3 years. But after going through that, I had been doing a lot of project management and engineering. I still do some engineering on the side. I've got a little consulting firm, but nothing that's conflicting with anything that we do here. I just started realizing that I wanted to do something that I loved, but I needed to kind of take a little bit of the extra work and a little bit of the stress out of my life so that I can enjoy things a little bit better. Cancer kind of really changes you. I had met Mr. Bosworth and Vince Bosworth several years, I would say a few years before that, probably an AISC conference. And they're just amazing people, but very detail-oriented and very driven. And I knew that if I were possibly able to take a position with them, it would take me to a different level on my knowledge and my skill. And I really just wanted to be able to help industry and to get better at what I knew, but to take it to another level. And Bosworth, one of the top 10 steel erectors in the United States, and we build very, very large structures. We built the Ranger Stadium, and we build stadiums, we build high rises. And It's a different animal, but it's still, structural steel erection. It's just another thing too, the teamwork that we have here. And I knew that. I saw it from the outside. I'd been to some classes with several of his employees, and I had met Vince there. He actually got up and got coffee for everybody. And I just thought, wow, this is the owner of the company. And, he's so down to earth. And it was great. It was just such a great fit. And, it's definitely challenging. We're held to a different standard, I would think, for our company. And he holds us, in a really high respect. We work together closely on pretty much everything. There are no things that I can ever take to him or talk to him about, or anybody in the company for that matter. It just was a no-brainer for me. I knew it was going to be perfect. I needed a change, and I'm so glad I took it.
Could you talk just a little bit about the sessions that you'll be presenting at NASCC?
One of them that I'm presenting is with Tom Sputo. He is very active in SDI, and he writes several of the technical papers. Probably one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. He has a PhD, he's a PE, he's an SE, he owns an engineering company. He is a consultant to metal deck companies. So we're going to discuss methods for attaching steel deck, advantages, disadvantages, the engineering and installation considerations, who actually makes the decisions, kind of go through some of the realistic issues that we have. It's very, very common for the erector to have to submit for a change. And I would say 99.9% of our projects, we go straight to the deck attachment. One of the first things I do is try to make that change. It's never typically what we need. I am seeing a trend lately that it is starting to change and it's getting better. So we just want to share that information. Tom's going to talk about some of the different design methods and some of the over-design items and kind of how engineers can look at deck diaphragm a little differently, section properties. And so that kind of leads into the second session Carl and I will be presenting. So we're going to do a session called Practical Guidance for Erection Engineering from a Steel Erector. And so kind of the description describes it all, but university engineering curricula is generally geared toward, training engineers in the design office. And so engineers in the design office have limited opportunity to observe how structures are constructed. And a lot more recently, design firms are kind of venturing into the world of erection engineering. And a lot of the engineers don't have firsthand experience. So we want to share our collaborative many years of practical experience.
Switching gears a little bit, I was just curious, have you ever received any particularly memorable advice, either in the military or through work or life in general?
Absolutely. Probably life-changing for me. As I mentioned before, my dad, he took me in when I was almost 16 years old, and I was in a pretty rough place, but he's an attorney, and I was just fascinated by him. I had never really known anybody that had, a degree. I didn't know anything about college, and I remember sitting in there in the kitchen, and I said, Dad, I was in my senior year, and I said, can I go to college? I said, what's an associate's degree? What's a bachelor's degree? What's a master's? And he explained everything to me. And I said, is it really expensive? Is this something I could even do? And he said, Nyckey, if other people can do it, so can you. It just hit me so hard because I thought all my life, I thought only, wealthy people can go to college. Only and I worked 3 jobs all through college plus the GI Bill. So that was, great, but it didn't stop there. I mean, I think about this all the time. When we were talking about AISC, when I went and signed up to do a presentation, I thought if other people can do it, so can I. And then I remember being in college and thinking, I can't do this. It's too hard. This is too scary. Whatever the subject was, I was struggling with. And I remember hearing my dad say, Nyckey, if other people can do it, so can you. And I always lift my head up and I hear that every time I struggle with something. And especially being a female in industry, because I all the time always compare myself and I try to work harder or at least make myself feel like I'm doing as, better or as good as my counterparts, my male counterparts. But it's just an unspoken. I mean, I just always am constantly thinking, okay, if they can do it, so can I. If they can do it, so can I. and it changed my life. I mean, I'll never forget it. I was 17 years old, and I've given that advice to other people.
Can you talk a little bit about some of your interests outside of work?
Well, I actually have a 6-month-old little boy now. He's my little miracle baby. I'm kind of figuring out new interests, but I love to cook. I'm always trying new recipes, and I'm a very healthy eater, so I'm always learning new ways to create things like that. And then obviously I'm kind of learning having a baby. Another thing too that I'm interested in and I'm willing to try, I think probably when it warms up this year, is to start a garden. We'll see how that goes. The plant next to me is looking at me like, you haven't watered me in 3 weeks, so I'm about to die. But
do you have like a go-to kind of recipe that like you can't think of anything else? You're like, we'll do this one again today.
For me, that's funny that you asked that because someone just asked me that question the other day. It's always my homemade from scratch spaghetti, and it has no meat in it, but I use whole wheat pasta, and then I let it sit in the fridge for an entire day before I eat it because, the flavors all meld together. So I'm kind of wishing I'd made some last night.
You obviously aren't from Dallas or Waxahachie, that kind of the Metroplex originally. What are your feelings on the Dallas Cowboys? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you ignore them?
I'm actually not really that much into sports.
Okay.
It's a big thing around here. Actually, one of the other project managers said, Nyckey, you have to start liking football. It's crazy that you don't. Everybody likes football. So I think that might be something else I need to get into. And then I also I love watching golf. So I plan this summer to start learning to play golf.
Is there one place that you've gone work-wise outside of the United States that you found particularly, intriguing or that you loved?
It's Oconus, Hawaii. I was over there for several months working on a project. It was for the Navy base. It was great. We worked 7 days a week, so I didn't really get a lot of time outside in the areas where the tourists were, but we stayed in an area that was mostly locals, and I learned a lot about their culture. We worked with the union ironworkers in Hawaii, and they did real luau's, and they would bring us meals from their cookouts, and they were just super nice people and natives to Hawaii. That's probably the best experience for me, just not only being able to learn about their culture, but to work with those iron workers. They were very helpful. I learned a lot on that project, and at the end of the job, there was a box sitting on one of our buggies or something, and they were all kind of huddled around it. And I walked over there, and they all looked at me weird, and I said, "What's going on?" And they were like, "We got this box. I don't know what it is." I said, "Okay, open it." They were like, "You open it." And so I opened the box, and they had gotten me a hard hat, like an ironworker brown hard hat, because I had a white one, and they had already put a bunch of their local stickers on it. They just said, "We really like you. We know you know what you're doing. We want you to fit in and not stick out. And we wanted to get you something to thank you for all your help out here."
Wow. So, that's a pretty big gift.
It was great.